Welcome, Lucifer Almighty. Not the Lucifer Almighty, which I am under the dominion of, but the Lucifer Almighty in the live stream chat, 1,000 Pine Points too. But in 1 John, it does say that all those who are not Christians are under the dominion of the evil one. Some people say this is the secret of my success, that I am surprisingly effective in my rhetoric and my skill set with causing Christians to doubt. The reason for this is because of the power of Satan. And if Christians are out there who believe that, don't fear me. You have the power of God on your side, which is stronger than the power of Satan, so you have nothing to worry about. You should not fear PineCreek, even though I'm under the power of the evil one. You should be able to sit with me at a restaurant and have a tasty beverage, and there should be no problems, no fear, right? Isn't that true? Or does the fact that I admit that I'm under the power of the evil one make you a little hesitant to even watch this video right now? Let me get rid of this. Make sure I have no disruptions. Tyler Vela, I've known him for a while. He's a Christian apologist who specializes in, well, I won't say yet. But I think he sinned yesterday with my friend Tjump. Someone page side 10 Brugenkate, because side 10 will be on my side in this video. I guarantee it. I love it. The reason why I think he used sinning is because he was trying to reason and give best explanations to a depraved sinner like Tjump. And how can that be? Like, he's suppressing the truth, Tjump, as myself, of course, is suppressing the truth. And so we can't even begin to see the truth as Tyler Vela sees it. I want to play, you know what's interesting? When you hear apologists talk to non-Christians and then hear them talk to Christians, it's sometimes good to point out the differences. I'm not going to do that too much here, but I want to show, this is Presuppositional Apologetics with Tyler Vela on strivingforeternity.org. By the way, if you think I spent hours and hours prepping for this show, you're wrong. I just did this started an hour or two ago. But I quickly found this, and I found very quickly the spot where Tyler tells Christians what his preferred apologetic style is. Let me see if I can play it here.
The one that I hold, and one of the reasons why you asked me to come on within the Reform group, is presuppositionalism. Presuppositionalism has been big since Cornelius Van Til really advocated for it in the mid 20th century. And presuppositionalism is basically the view that that human reason and our ability to reason has been tainted by sin, just like everything else. It's a reformed view that looks at the scriptures and says, if we're being true to what the scriptures say, not just in our theology but our apologetics, then our kind of reformed theology should drive our apologetics. And part of that is something like Romans 1, where the unbeliever is an act of suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. So what Van Til basically said is the unbeliever and the believer, while on the surface we have things in common, we can both ostensibly use our reason and we can both talk about evidences. At a deeper level, we have nothing in common.
Yes, at a deeper level, there is nothing in common between the Christian and everybody else, not just atheists. Because Christianity is the only worldview that makes sense. What's the phrase? Everything else is absurd. Every worldview other than Christianity is absurd under this view. Now I want to play a clip. Again, this is Tyler Vela talking to other Christians. He's in this clip. He says exactly what I just did. Let's find it. Now I'm playing this to show that what I think Tyler did with Tjump yesterday, and other presuppositional reformed Calvinist types can back me up on this. I think he was borderline sinning.
For it. So one of the things that I would argue is what's called the impossibility of the contrary.
That's the phrase, impossibility of the contrary. It's impossible for any contrary worldview to exist.
Which basically means it's impossible. It's logically impossible for the contrary to be true, and the contrary of God existing. That is, so it's impossible for not God as a proposition, anything that falls under not God, which is everything that isn't God, to be a foundation for the laws of logic.
Okay.
And in order for them to combat that, they would need to give an example. So they would need to give a reasonable explanation for how reason can exist on their naturalistic worldview.
Now, why does reasonable explanations have to happen for non-Christians but not Christians? Like, this is the issue that I think was happening yesterday with Tjump. Once you start talking about reasonable explanations, once you start talking about explanatory power, once you start talking about explanatory scope, aren't you now an evidentialist? And how dare you, Tyler Vela, put God on trial? If Sai's watching this in the replay, he's smiling right now. He's going, even though Doug's going to hell, I love that man. How dare you put Yahweh on trial? Saying, this is God the best explanation or not? No, you can't even begin to even use induction and deduction and abduction without first having this God exist. Now, of course, Tyler says this, but when he's putting the shoe on the other foot, so to speak, now we want evidentialist type reasoning.
And they're really not able to do so. I've been doing this this approach for about 10 years now. Nothing new under the sun that I hear these days. And a lot of them fall back on attempts to force science into the question, which gets all kinds of fun, because then they'll say, we might not be able to ground the laws of logic, but we have this thing we have repeated experiments and observation where something that does exist doesn't also not exist.
Yeah, grounding, having a basis for the laws of logic is really huge. It's a big point that a lot of presuppositionalists make. I'm going to quote Cy Ten Brunkate. He has a nice line, a nice rhetorical line, and this is what he says. The laws of logic reflect the thinking of God. God is universal. He is not made of matter. He does not change. Logic is universal, not made of matter, and does not change. Logic reflects the thinking of God. And that's how I justify the laws of logic, says Cy. And I'm asking atheists like Tjump, how do they justify the laws of logic without God? Well, this is how... I did this a while back. Actually, let me put it up here. So you guys can use this at will. So I just took what Cy did, and this is basically Jump's strategy in talking to presuppositionalists like Tyler, although Tyler was jumping from apologetic to apologetic yesterday. This is what I would say. The laws of logic reflect the properties of the universe. The universe is universal. The universe is made of matter, and the constants of the universe do not change. Logic is universal. Logic is the property of the existence of matter, and logic does not change. Logic reflects the property of the universe. That's how I justify the laws of logic. And I am asking Tyler Vela how he justifies the laws of logic without borrowing from my worldview. You see how that works? That works actually quite well. Now, there's one big, if you're a Christian listening, there's one huge advantage of presuppositional apologetics, and that is you really don't need to know anything. You can be pretty ignorant. And Cy 10 Brunkate can attest to this. He always likes to point out that he's just what were you, Cy? Some type of worker, mill? I don't know. Steel mill? No, I don't know. And so you really don't need to know much. You just read the Bible and say that it has to be true. Everything else is absurd. And I think Tyler even admits this here when he's talking to these Christian ladies.
that needs to go into that. You need to look at the historical sources. You need to be familiar with comparative historical sources. You need to be familiar with extra biblical citations and the dates. And really, you need to be familiar with philosophical
Tyler's talking about all the things you need to be familiar with if you're an evidentialist like Michael Licona.
arguments about miracles and what's more plausible. I mean, Bayesian apologetics. If you're going to make the type of argument that a Gary Habermas or a William Lane Craig or Michael Licona does, you're doing a ton of research anyways. So it's not necessary that presuppositionalism takes more research than the others.
That's a good way to put it. Basically saying you don't need to do all those things.
Presuppositionalism also has the benefit of you don't need to know a bunch of facts. You don't actually need to know all of, the historical authors and when, Pliny the Younger wrote and the extra biblical citations in Josephus and the third. You don't need to know all that stuff.
Yes, Christians listening, you got to have presuppositional apologetics. And all the non-Christians listening, not just atheists, all the non-Christians listening, do not discourage presuppositional apologetics. Embrace it, enjoy it, encourage it. We want Christians like Tyler Vela to use presuppositional apologetics, because my theory is it won't save one soul for Jesus.
Once you get the concept of the unbeliever's worldview cannot justify even their attempt to reason about it. That's really the most that you need to know. And then from there, just being a good Socratic and asking questions. When you're talking to your friend, when you're talking to your friends, on your worldview, what does it mean for us to think about things?
Yeah, and some people even say that about street epistemology. You don't even have to know anything. You don't have to know a whole bunch of facts. All you do is Socratic questioning. You ask them. And so I agree with Tyler and what he's saying here. You really don't, as a presuppositional apologist, you don't have to know much. You just ask, well, what's your standard? What's your basis for these things? And where's your starting point? And then they'll basically say, well, sorry, that's a bad starting point because only my God can be the foundation, not explain, the foundation for these things. Everything else is absurd. Okay, so now let's finally I put that all on the plate because this is Tyler Vela talking to Christians on his preferred apologetic. Now I'm not going to say he totally abandons this. No, not at all. But you'll hear some key words here where he's like putting one foot in evidentialism and another foot in presuppositionalism. And it's actually quite hilarious for me to listen to.
Yeah, so some of the reasons that...
Whoa, that's way too fast. That's the speed I listened to it the first time. So I'll probably... I was actually here in the live stream chat yesterday when it was going on. Let's try 1.5x. I don't speed it up to purposely make people look bad or anything. It's just, I want to, yeah.
That I believe in God. I'm so sorry. So you've been great about it. So I appreciate that. So some of the reasons that I believe in God and why I think that God is the best explanation for things are honestly manifold. I think there's a cumulative case. But primarily, I think that God functions, and I'm going to give what I think are defensible, reasons that I can give that someone else should believe, not something like personally veridical reasons like the testimony of the Holy Spirit. Those might be reasons why I personally believe. I think
they might be reasons you personally believe. Oh man, I didn't cue that up. I found I have a blog of where Tyler Vela says his story of how he became a Christian. And it was in college. He wasn't raised by Christian or theistic parents, apparently. But it was in college, in philosophy class. I posted this yesterday in the live stream chat. So if you go to Tjump's channel and look at the live stream, I actually post the link there. And it talks about him starting to be more open to theistic ideas. And wouldn't you know it, within the next sentence, he mentions a girl. And I was just like laughing inside. Like the PineCreek theorem lives on in Tyler Vela. Tyler, if you ever listen to this, which I'm sure you will, write down on a piece of paper what date you became a Christian, if you remember. And then also write on a piece of paper what date you met this girl or your now wife. And how close are those dates together? I would love to know that.
You're more interested in reasons why anyone at large should have reasonable belief, right?
Yeah, I'm more interested in like the philosophical concepts. I don't usually argue.
Okay, so Tom Tjump is basically, I'm more interested in the philosophical arguments. This is where Tom and I differ greatly, because this whole video, this whole live stream that Tom had is not delving into the real reasons why Tyler believes. And I think Tyler even kind of admits it here.
Why I personally veridical reasons like the testimony of the Holy Spirit. Those might be reasons why I personally believe. I think you're more interested.
Are those the reasons you personally believe? Was it because of some guilt and sin that you had in college? Or was it existential angst, this feeling of there has to be more to life than just this? Was it getting to know this girl and she's had an influence on you? Or was it the testimony of the Holy Spirit that you felt the presence of the Holy Spirit in your life? Or was it because every other worldview is absurd and you needed the correct preconditions for intelligibility and all that stuff? I really doubt it. I think Christians use presuppositional apologetics for the exact reasons that Tyler mentioned at that timestamp, 23 minutes of that Striving for Eternity thing, that it's easy. You don't need to know a whole lot of facts. You don't need to know, you don't have to memorize all these things and like Michael Licona has to. No, you just shut those non-Christians up, not just atheists. You shut the mouths. This is Greg Bonson's and Van Til's language. The goal of presuppositional apologetics is to shut the mouths of those who disagree with you.
In reasons why anyone at large should have reasonable belief, right?
Yeah, I'm more interested in like the philosophical concepts. I don't usually argue against people's personal experience.
Yeah. So I think that God is the best explanation for all of the features of reality that we see. And I think he does this as a singular, simple explanation. For example, some of the features of reality, why there is something rather than nothing, explains the one and the many, the existence of the laws of logic, the existence of objective moral values and duties, why there's persons, why there's minds, why there's coherence between.
So if you buy into Christianity, you can explain all these things. But the question to ask a presuppositionalist when they start saying, hey, my worldview explains this, 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 and this. Okay. Does the Unitarian view of Christianity explain this, 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 and this? Remember, the Unitarian view is that Jesus is not God, not the Trinitarian view. How far off the beaten path of Christianity do you have to go before your worldview is absurd? Is Unitarian worldview absurd? Is the Judaic worldview absurd, Tyler? Can they explain all these things, this, and this, even though they reject that Jesus Christ is Lord and God in flesh, not just a prophet or anything, or a Messiah, but actually God? These are the questions you need to ask presuppositionalists, because if they grant that you can be sort of a little bit off the Christian worldview, you can still account for these things, explain these things, then that opens up like, well, how far do we move these goalposts?
Our interpersonal mind and the external world. I can't remember who it said, but it was something like and I'm going to butcher the quote, but just the insane applicability of mathematics to reality. I think that there is evidence.
Fibonacci, that proves God.
From the historical reliability of the Bible, its life-changing power over history, the evidence from the empty tomb and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, so on and so forth. Now,
see, this is evidential talk, like. This is putting God on trial again.
Before you say, okay, well, we can talk about each one of those. We can talk about each one of those. What I'm saying is that I think that God can actually serve as a singular function or a singular explanation for every single one of those. So when we're looking at what a good explanation is, we're looking at, does it have high explanatory power? That is, can it explain the data under question without lots of...
See, this is where I think, and I'm asking this question to other Christians. I'm not saying this seriously for myself, for Tom, or any atheist listening. I'm saying this to other Christians listening. I'm saying this to presuppositional, reformed Calvinist types, those Christians listening. Do you think Tyler's sinning here? Because listen to what he's saying.
High explanatory power, that is, can it explain the data under question without lots of modifications, that it's not ad hoc, that it has explanatory...
He sounds like Michael Licona here. And he's putting God on trial. How dare you, Tyler? Like, are you saying that Tom and PineCreek can sit and judge what you're saying, the evidence and the explanatory scope and explanatory power, and we, in our fallible selves, can make a proper judgment that God exists? No, you don't believe that, do you? You believe that Tom and I are incapable of making that judgment unless we have the regenerational power of the Holy Spirit first. Isn't that what you believe, Tyler?
Scope, so can the
I'm sorry, this is just so much fun because I think he believes that. I'm quite sure he does. But yet he's putting on this facade that this is about evidence, at least at this point in the conversation.
singular explanation explain lots of data and other questions without needing to multiply explanations. So on Christian theism, we have a single explanation for all of these things, where on something like naturalism, you would almost need a different explanation for each one of those questions. So I think you have explanatory scope, explanatory power, the low amount of ad hocness. You have explanatory.
So Tyler's saying, look, we got two worldviews, yours, Tom, and mine, and we can compare how they explain things, how they can account for things. But again, I think this is, in Tyler's worldview, borderline sinful. He's putting God on the judgment seat that we're judging which worldview is more likely to be correct. No. You start with God, and sure, evidence is great. We love evidence, but you can't even think about evidence and evaluate the evidence unless you have the proper starting point, right, Tyler?
Simplicity, so on and so forth. But my main reason, and I listed it as one of those, is that I think that God is the best explanation, and the possible grounding for something like a realm of transcendent and absolute laws of.
See, Tyler, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you believe what you just said. Listen to what you said, Tyler.
And the possible grounding for something like a realm. But my main reason, and I listed it as one of those, is that I think that God is the best explanation. And
you believe that God's the best explanation? I don't think you believe that. I think you think God is the only possible explanation, not the best one. Am I wrong, Tyler? I bet you 1,000 pine points I'm not wrong. You would say that God is the only explanation, right? Or are you actually willing to say that you have the best one now, but you may reconsider? There are other options out there that you might consider, and you might be persuaded that you don't have the best explanation now?
And the possible grounding for something like a realm of transcendent and absolute.
Stillmate IB says, wait, is Tyler a presuppositionalist? I'm not sure he is. Well, it's a good thing you came late, Stillmate, because I can... I'll let his own words speak for himself. I know I played this at the very beginning, but take a listen.
Very, very, very few people that argue for that. So usually you're not even going to run up against it. The one that I hold, and one of the reasons why you asked me to come on within the Reform group, is presuppositionalism. Presuppositionalism.
The one I hold, and the reason why I came on is about, so he was asked to come on a Christian broadcast and talk about presuppositional, because that's the apologetic, that's the view he holds.
Absolute laws of logic, such that without such a being existing, there's no reason to understand why there would be anything like a transcendent realm of laws of logic within a purely naturalistic world. And such that, as far as I've heard, I have not heard any really compelling alternatives.
You haven't heard any compelling alternatives. Well, first of all, you have to, I think, tell your viewers that there are no other alternatives. So whether you hear them or not is irrelevant, because you're a presuppositionalist, right? Your starting point. Everything else is absurd. The impossibility of the contrary. That's what you said, the impossibility of the contrary. So there's no possible alternatives. But just to give you an example of an impossible alternative that, of course, you can just throw away under the rug because it's impossible. But one could say that their brute fact, their starting point is the universe, that the universe exists, has the properties it has. I should say cosmos. The cosmos has the properties it has. And one of those properties is the laws of logic, because how in the world can you have the law of identity if you have nothing to identify? You need something there to identify in order for the laws of identity to even hold. So it's just an outpouring, the outpouring of the outflowing of certain things from God's nature? Well, one of the outflowings of the universe's nature is these things we call the let's say the three laws of logic and so forth. So that's the starting point. That's the basis. And from there we build up, and that we can learn things about the universe. So these are very, simple core presuppositions that a guy like I might have that of course is impossible, but could, explain some things.
To this explanation.
Or be the basis for certain things.
As a powerful explanation. So for me, not only is it a powerful singular explanation, simple explanation, there also doesn't seem to be really any strong rivals to it. So
all right,
that's the basic layout for it.
Sure. So I agree with your argument that there has to be essentially one explanation for all of these different things. You can't just have like one explanation that explains one thing and then a different explanation that explains a different thing. So I would say that all of these can be explained equally as well by naturalism as they can by theism. To take the transcendental argument, for example, you said this is required to be grounded in the mind of a God of kind of something to explain the transcendental nature of math and logic and those kinds of concepts. But from my perspective, those are simply descriptive. If you go to like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and for formal logic, it says logic is a formal language, like Visual C++ or Visual Basic or HTTP, any kind of coding language. It's just a language.
By the way, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is the Bible for philosophers. It's almost as sacrosanct as the New Testament for Christians.
Language made up by humans to describe reality. So reality exists, and reality is the way reality is, and then logic and math simply describe those. They're not really transcendental; they're just languages. So they're about as transcendental as English,
Tom.
Pretty much.
Well, if I could respond to that, I don't want to cut you off. I would simply say that what you're doing is confusing ontology with epistemology, right? So there's the difference between the ontological reality of logic as a feature of reality and the language that we've come up with to describe those laws of logic. So when we...
Just like logic is a reflection of the nature of the personal deity named Jesus Christ, and Yahweh, of course, and the Holy Spirit, so logic can be an outflowing of one of the properties of the universe or the cosmos.
Say something like the law of non-contradiction. We could talk about the law of non-contradiction ontologically. What does it mean to say that a contradiction cannot be instantiated? Then we can talk about, well, what do we mean when we talk about the semantics, the terms and the words and the descriptions that we use within language to describe that? Those are two different questions. I'm not talking about the semantic, the epistemological question. I'm talking about the ontological question. So if I were to ask you, not just because, well, let me ask you that. Did you think contradictions could obtain before humans existed to create the conventions of the laws of logic as you've described them?
No.
Right. So we're going to say that there's something to logic that is actually not contingent upon our convention, our inventing of these descriptions. There's something objectively real about them that is ontologically distinct from the conventions that we've created to describe that reality.
Well, I would phrase it differently. I would say that it describes something that exists. So the contradiction can't exist because it describes a real thing. The logic itself isn't a real thing. It's just a language. But it describes like reality. Reality can't contradict
I'm going to fast forward this part because
itself.
It bores me a little bit. And I don't have timestamps here. I'm just going to... There we go.
Consistent grounding for it.
Right. So I think that the laws of logic, the semantic epistemology side, that part requires a mind because we invented that part. But what it actually describes, the ontology, is just a feature of reality. It's a part, reality itself.
Yeah, just a feature of reality. This is exactly what I said. So, of course, this is wrong. Of course, this is impossible. But just like the outflowing, that logic reflects God's nature, as Cy ten Bruggencate says. So the naturalist could say that logic is an outflowing of the property of the universe.
Itself can't contradict itself. That isn't because of some kind of transcendental laws of logic. It's just that's just a part of the nature of reality itself. So
why?
Why it just is like why? If I ask,
but why? But here's this is why. So this kind of gets to the rub of it. So at that point, you're saying, well, naturalism doesn't have an explanation for that. It's just an axiomatic assumption.
I love this is the irony. There is so much irony in this. It's just an axiomatic assumption. Presupposition is God's nature. And Tom, I think, should have pounded this really hard with Tyler throughout the whole thing. Is there a reason why God's nature is the way it is as opposed to something else? Is there a reason? No. God's nature is what it is, Doug. Well, isn't that a brute fact? Isn't that just axiomatic that God is what he is?
Basically, my worldview can't account for that. So I just have to say it is. It's just a brute fact, right?
Now, he's talking about Tom here. Let me rewind that.
Doesn't have an explanation for that. It's just an axiomatic assumption. Basically, My worldview can't account for that. So I just have to say it is. It's just a brute fact, right? You would never allow me to get away with that in my worldview, right?
You would never allow me to use brute facts? Okay, let's see what happens here.
You'd never allow me to say, well, I believe in the supernatural. Why? Because it's just a brute fact. Why does it exist? I don't need an explanation for why it exists. It's just a brute fact. You would
So is Yahweh's existence a brute fact to you, Tyler?
never allow that for my worldview.
And yet, with these Christians, you said any other worldview other than your God existing is absurd. It's the impossibility of the contrary. I have you on record saying that.
You want to allow it for your worldview when it comes to a feature of reality that your worldview can no longer ground. You just need it as an axiomatic truth, right? Because you don't want to. You're a smart guy. You don't want to throw, logic, you don't want to throw just caution to the wind, say, to hell with logic, I can't explain it, therefore it's no good. You want logic to function within your worldview. But when I back you up until you get to a, kind of a backstop, rather than actually showing, well, my worldview can actually show why and how the laws of logic exist and why existence is ordered according to principles of logic.
Why does logic exist? Because it reflects the properties of the cosmos.
Logic. You don't have that explanation, so you fall back on its axiom. It's just brute fact. It just has to be that way.
Yeah, and why is God's nature the way it is? It just has to be that way. It's axiomatic. God is who he is. I am who I am. It's a brute fact.
Right.
So my worldview explains one more thing than your worldview can.
Explanation. How does God existing explain logic? How exactly? Well, I think Tyler said because it reflects, Side 10 Bruggencate said it the best. Because it reflects, how did he say? Logic reflects the thinking of God. Why can't Tjump say that logic reflects a property of the universe? Done.
So, right, my argument is that naturalism can explain everything equally as well as theism. So you're saying that your God's nature is essentially a brute fact. And I'm using essentially the same argument to say that nature's reality of it being...
You notice, Tyler, this is very important. Tyler does not disagree with this. Tyler just kind of scolded Tom of just saying, oh, you're just sitting back on axioms at this point. You're just sitting back on brute facts. And when Tom points it out, look what Tyler does with his head. He agrees.
Fact. And I'm using essentially the same argument to say that nature's reality of it being logical is a brute fact.
Right. Here's the difference.
Here's the difference. You have brute facts. I have brute facts, but my brute facts are better.
The difference is the fact that you've added in the God unnecessarily. So I can get rid of the God and just keep the necessary nature to explain logic. So
here's the difference. So the difference is that you and I likely agree the natural world is contingent. Unless you think this world, unless you're what's called the necessitarian, where you think that this world, every feature of this world as it exists in this world is a necessary fact, this world is a contingent fact, including the sum total things. It's contingent. It's not necessary. So it can actually not account for itself. It's a contingent thing. It's not a necessary thing. Whereas the concept of God is a necessary entity. Right. So again, actually, all I'm saying is, and here I'm not even saying that.
Okay, you guys, you probably can hear what I'm queuing up. Now, of course, William Lane Craig is not a presuppositionalist, but let me bring him in here. He was asked about the hardest thing. Let's see if I can find it here. Now, remember, Tyler is basically admitting, okay, you have brute facts, I have brute facts, but here's the difference. God is not contingent. This is Capturing Christianity, talking to William Lane Craig on about the philosophical arguments for God that he's least confident in. Let's see if I can find it.
So the last question that I have for you is, what view that you've defended are you least certain of?
Oh. Tick, 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 tick.
Well, it would probably be one of the arguments for God's existence. Maybe, for example, the Leibnizian argument from contingency.
Yeah, he's the least confident on that. But I guess Tyler is more confident than William Lane Craig.
Naturalism is false. I can argue that. But my point here is not that merely that naturalism is false.
I'm getting a huge dopamine rush.
False. It's to rebuff the claim that you said, well, naturalism can explain it just as well as theism can. And my point is it can't, because naturalism, unless you want to affirm necessarianism, which that's a tough row to hoe. And I see you. I saw you smile when I say it. I think you know that that's a nearly impossible.
Yeah, great question, Camille. Was the resurrection necessary, contingent? Of course, it was necessary. It was planned before the creation of time.
The position to affirm, unless you want to affirm that, you have to say that naturalism, it doesn't account for it. It just has it as a brute fact, but it's not an explanation for why it is that way. Whereas I'm saying, well, Christian theism explains why it is that way, right? So Christian theism has the benefit of having explanatory value, explanatory power over that question of reality.
Yeah, I know these words are coming out of Tyler's mouth that explains things, but how? I don't know if Tyler's just being obtuse or if he can't. Tyler, can you pretend you're not trying to raise the confidence of Christians right now for a second and see how this same presuppositional type argument can be used against you? Well, which was exactly what Tjump was trying to do, but it was always left to, no, but my brute fact is better than yours. My dad can beat up your dad, is that type of apologetic.
Whereas it's a mystery on naturalism. It just exists as a brute fact. So again, that doesn't mean naturalism's false. It just means that when we're putting those things on the scale, naturalism doesn't have the explanatory scope over the existence of laws of logic in the same way that theism does. Theism wins out on that explanatory power.
Right. So just like you believe that your God to be a necessary thing, I could say that there's a property of nature which is itself a necessary thing. So it can offer an equal grounding to theism in the same sense that they're both asserted as being the necessary grounds of everything, and their nature entails logic as a consequence of their necessity.
No, Tom. There is no way in the cosmos that the cosmos can be a necessary thing, not contingent. That's foolishness.
So
Are you a necessitarian?
No.
So then you can't say that.
Yes, I can.
If this world is not a necessary world, if you're not a necessitarian, how is it that this world can the innate logical structure of this world can be a necessary fact?
Because you can have different possible worlds. There only has to be one necessary thing that has to exist, one necessary property, and then from that there can be lots of contingent properties that exist.
So then it's not a necessary fact. It's a contingent fact. It's contingent fact of this possible world.
No,
so you could have another possible world.
No. This possible world is contingent, and there is some necessary thing that our world emerges from.
So then the laws of logic are transcendent to this possible world.
Yes, they're tied into the necessary thing.
Okay.
I just, the Lord impressed upon me, a thought popped into my head. I'm sure it's the Holy Spirit. So I'm going to find another video while they're talking. So just hang on. This is getting to the multiverse and stuff. And of course, William Lane Craig is golden for these conversations. Then you've just admitted my case that the laws of logic are transcendent realities that are not actually contingent features, that are not features of this world alone. They are transcendent features that govern this possible world. We agree on that then?
No, not exactly. So when we're talking about worlds, I mean like our universe as opposed to all of nature, all of reality. So our universe can be contingent, and there's something more fundamental which is necessary, like, for example, the multiverse, just to throw out a hypothetical. And then logic is grounded in the nature of the necessary thing, like the multiverse. So it's still a part of our universe. Our universe is just not the source of logic. Logic just describes our universe.
I'm somewhat confused then. When you're talking possible worlds, so when we're talking necessity and possibility, typically we're talking about like modal operators. When you're saying possible, you actually mean like multiverse possible. Like we're not talking about modal logic. We're now in the world of other worlds within the multiverse.
Well, there's two kinds of necessity and contingency was the distinction.
Yep.
Yeah, this is not difficult, Tyler. What Tom is basically saying is even if our universe, our reality, our world with its time and its laws of nature, laws of physics, even if those are contingent, that doesn't mean that there isn't a natural something out there, the cosmos, that it could be non-contingent. It could be necessary, and that it caused either the multiverse or our reality or whatever.
Going with. So necessity as in the ground of everything, and the contingency is something that emerges from that, which isn't a necessary fact. It's just a possibility.
Okay. And so then in that, I think I understand you. So correct me if I'm wrong. So my original argument had to deal with necessity and contingency in the modal sense, right? Where we're talking about possible worlds and necessary worlds, right? it seems like what you're saying is that, well, this local expression within the multiverse, the laws of logic might be outside or transcend this local universe. This, I'm going to use this term sloppily. Physicists are going to freak out. This bubble universe, where the laws of logic might be a feature of the multiverse that transcend this bubble universe within the multiverse. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, it transcends our universe, but it's still just a feature of nature. It's a feature of the necessary part of nature.
Okay, then all you've done is push the problem back. So then I can ask, well, can the multiverse exist and not exist?
Right, and I'm saying there is some feature of nature which is itself necessary in the same way you believe God to be necessary. So it doesn't have an option. It has to exist. It is a necessary thing in nature.
So does the multiverse necessarily exist?
Well, that was just an example. So I wouldn't use the multiverse in that sense, but I'd say there is something in nature which cannot not exist.
Is that a faith-based commitment, or do you have any type of reasoning to think that that's the case?
Okay, this is golden. Okay, and I found the video, by the way, that I was looking for. But Christians, you know how atheists always, not always, but often get the definition of faith wrong. Look how Tyler, he's perpetuating this myth of what faith really is. Listen to Tyler's assumed definition of faith here.
Sort of.
Of reasoning to think that that's the case?
Sort of. So, well, that was just an example. So I wouldn't use the multiverse in that sense, but I'd say there is something in nature which cannot not exist.
Is that a faith-based commitment, or do you have any type of reasoning to think that that's the case?
Is that a faith-based commitment, or do you have any type of reasoning? Do you hear what Tyler's saying about faith? Is this a faith-based commitment, or do you have reasons? Oh, I have another thought. I had another video of Tim Keller saying on one of my faith videos that faith begins with thinking, faith begins with reasoning. But Tyler's saying here, now, I don't know if he's just pulling a Frank Turek on us and saying, and using the atheist, those clouded atheist definition of faith against guys like Tjump, or if he actually thinks that faith is different than reasons, that faith is just believing something without reasons, without evidence.
Sort of. So I can say that all of the arguments and evidence you use to indicate a God work equally as well for this thing. So I technically don't believe in this.
It doesn't. So, and I've listened to you enough to know kind of your argument style, and I don't mean this pejoratively. I mean, I have an argument style if you listen to me enough. It simply is not the case that these conceptual competitors are equal competitors. So the multiverse cannot explain the laws of logic, because again, the question can apply. You'd have to argue. How
can God explain the laws of logic? Well, because it's an outflowing of his nature. How can the universe, the multiverse, or anything more back from that explain the logic? Because it's an outflowing, it's a property of its nature. We can use the exact same language, Tyler, as you use, and just apply it to a non-supernatural thing.
That the multiverse is necessary to sustain the claim that the multiverse is therefore a rival concept to the existence of God. Because in order for it to be a rival concept, you would need to affirm that the multiverse is a necessarily existing thing to stop as a backdrop.
Right. To clarify, the multiverse is a physical theory. It's a part of physics. It isn't a necessary thing. It isn't a stopping point. It's just the next stage in scientific discovery. So I'm not making a scientific alternative here. I'm saying there's something beyond that, which I call naturalistic pantheism, that there is some fundamental, eternal, all-powerful aspect of necessary nature. We just haven't discovered it yet.
By the way, I have a video on William Lane Craig admitting that our universe, our reality, our laws of physics and fundamental constants could have been formed, could have been created by something other than Yahweh. Now he had, I don't know if I should play it.
Physical eschatology, but I am saying it's very, very similar. So if you can believe in what modern science says about physical eschatology, I think that makes it a lot easier to believe in Christian eschatology about the return of Christ and the end of the world. Heavens and we can says about physical eschatology because it reminds one of what you say, or what one reads in 1 Peter, where it says that the
This is not the video I was thinking of. Sorry, guys. But he basically says that due to quantum fluctuations, a universe can create a whole new universe. So our reality as we see it now, today, could have been created not by God, but by another universe. And so William Lane Craig admits that. But he uses it to show something else.
Yeah, and so I would push back and say, okay, and this is where we're going to continue, because I've heard you bring up, flying spaghetti monster and naturalistic pantheism and naturalistic panentheism. Have you gone to panentheism? I think I've heard that in the past couple.
I've used panentheism, but I haven't called it naturalistic panentheism.
And we can get to some of those. The problem with all of those is that in order for them to come as rival concepts, you have to keep making all these little ad hoc adjustments to make them similar concepts.
Ad hoc adjustments. Is it an ad hoc adjustment to go from 3,000 years ago, viewing most people, the Israelites viewed Yahweh as a single person? Sure, there was, there was angels and demons and other L's in the universe, gods with a low G. But 3,000 years ago, was there this idea of the Trinity floating around? Or is this concept of God 2,000 years ago being a trinity of persons, is that an ad hoc adjustment, Tyler?
Right. So I can say, well, one of the reasons why, there's more to the existence of God that is the explanation, that has explanatory power here than just the necessary existence. Not only do I think you haven't sustained the case for necessary existence because you haven't actually argued for it, but also the existence of God as a
yes, he has
personal agent is.
My explanation is better than your explanation because my God is personal. If you say that the cosmos is the brute fact, the source of how we can justify or have a basis, a foundation for logic, well, that's not as good as my explanation because my God is personal. He loves me, don't you know?
Is part of the explanatory power because we understand when we're talking about the laws of logic, we understand that what it means for laws of logic to be principles of true thought. We understand what that means for a mind to do that. We understand how we can avoid something like an infinite regress.
How can we avoid an infinite regress with a personal deity? Don't you believe, Tyler, that Yahweh, and in three persons, of course, God in three persons, existed in the infinite past, eternal past? How could God have a thought if he's always existed? He would never have reached that thought because of all the time before that. Time in quotes. I've often said, even when I was a Christian, I used to say that one of God's properties, a part of his nature, is that he's bound in time, that he's not outside of time. But remember, I was a Christian saying this, but in order for a personal God to make any sense, he has to be bound in time. There has to be sequential thoughts. Otherwise, God can make a promise at one point and then go back on it by just shifting time around. But maybe this is just like a cat doing calculus. I don't know.
And we're dealing with a personal agent who has a volition, who could have created something in the finite past. Why there's something rather than nothing. We understand when you're dealing with a Trinitarian personal agent, why that can resolve something like the problem of the one and the many. Right? You would need to start making successive ad hoc adjustments.
Yeah, and the Trinity is probably the best example of an ad hoc adjustment to the belief in the Christian God, taken directly out of Judaism and then ad hocly added another person to it.
To your naturalistic pantheism, to flying spaghetti monster, you have to say, well, flying, we don't actually mean flying. Spaghetti, we don't actually mean spaghetti. Monster,
why couldn't there be a deistic type God who is not personal? He doesn't care about you, Tyler. What if it's true there's a God out there, a supernatural realm, that cares nothing about you, Tyler? Doesn't care, not personal, doesn't hear your prayers, but he is the foundation. He is the basis for logic because he wound up the clock and he let it run.
We don't actually mean monster. what we actually mean. We're going to redefine that to be a conceptually identical thing to what you mean by God. We're just going to call it a flying spaghetti monster for it to work, right? So what you're saying is, in order, flying spaghetti monster is a competition.
Does flying spaghetti monster really bother Christians that much? Or why is he talking about this? I guess he's just talking about that you have to add characteristics to the flying spaghetti monster to make it work.
By flying spaghetti monster, we mean exactly the same thing as God. Okay, well, a rose by the name, then you haven't actually presented a rival option. But the point here is that in just saying kind of this you're throwing out this this ad hoc imagined. Well, I'm just going to talk about this.
Christians, I hope you can see the irony here. I know you don't agree with me. That's taken for granted. But can you at least, even a Muslim or a Jew listening right now, can you just hear the irony? You're just, because he's talking about just throwing out imagined things like the Trinity.
This ad hoc imagined. Well, I'm just going to talk about this omnipotent, universal, natural that transcends all of reality. Okay, well, at that point, I don't know what you mean by natural then at that point. You have to mean that it's a non-natural natural, which I'm not sure that, I don't think that's coherent. It's kind of like, and I'll turn the screws on you.
Just view natural as not supernatural. How's that, Tyler?
A little bit. It's kind of like saying naturalistic pantheism. Well, pantheism is just that the divine is coextensive with the natural. To say naturalistic pantheism is to almost say non-divine divine, which, I mean, a married bachelor by any other name is still incoherent. I'm not even sure what that means. But to say that you're dealing with a natural transcendent thing, well, by transcendent, we just means that it is outside the natural. So I don't even know what that conceptually means to say a natural transcendent thing, right? So you already have.
I think Tom is just saying transcendent means something outside our reality, something outside our laws of physics, our universe, that there could be something prior, if that makes any sense, prior to the Big Bang.
Have to start making these ad hoc adjustments, which to me is going to say, well, God is still the better explanation then, because I don't need to make these natural, these ad hoc adjustments to what the concept and the words even mean.
Yeah, even the idea of God being all-knowing or all-merciful or all-loving, which has to do with the personal aspect, aren't these ad hoc adjustments to, let's say, the Kalam cosmological argument, to the teleological arguments? Aren't these ad hoc adjustments that premises are just being added on layer after layer after layer? Oh, did I mention he's omnipotent? Oh, but he only, with omniscience, he only knows what's knowable. The open theist might say, or the Molinist would say, whatever. There's so many ways to consolidate all these problems.
To make the explanation fit, like you would have to do to make these ad hoc adjustments to make it even a rival concept. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so firstly, by natural, I mean known natural as opposed to unknown natural. So anything that goes beyond the known natural could still be unknown natural as opposed to supernatural. So it transcends the known natural. Secondly, naturalistic pantheism isn't my term. I didn't invent it. It comes from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So you're going to have to take that up with them if you think it's inconsistent.
I would. I mean, it's largely semantics.
It's published in academic peer-reviewed papers. So if you're going to argue against that, you've got quite a bit of academic controversy you're going to have to go through. So that's way above my head.
Which I'm fine with. I mean, I do the same thing with what I think is the redefinition of atheism. So, which I don't mean to interrupt the point. I actually have, actually finish your point, and then I'll ask my follow-up question.
All right, so my definition of naturalistic pantheism just means eternal, all-powerful, necessary nature, and those three properties can explain everything, so I don't need any ad hoc changes. I can just show you how those three properties can explain all of the different aspects. So there's not an ad hoc change at any point to change it. It's always those three or one property, depending on how you...
Well, there would, because now you're... By saying the natural thing is necessary, you're actually by default, the logical implication of that is that you're a necessitarian. You'd have to be, right? Because if
I actually kind of agree with Tyler here. Is this the first time? I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, if you watch this in the replay, but I think you do believe that something natural is necessary.
If there's no personal agency determining I'm going to create something at this given point, right? If it's simply by natural processes, and by natural we can now mean multiverse natural, whatever that means. If it's simply cause in, cause out, then there's no explanation. If it existed eternally and necessarily, this universe would have come into existence necessarily eternally in the infinite past. Right, the fact that we have a finite beginning.
Yeah. So basically, what Tyler is saying here is he's giving arguments against the infinite regress problem. That if there was an infinite past, then we couldn't have gotten down here to where we are today. But even William Lane Craig, I wish I could find that clip, says because of a quantum fluctuation in a twinkling of an eye. He even used that language. Our universe could have been created by another universe. That's not time dependent. But again, I can use that same infinite regress problem with God. Like if he's always existed, how would he get to creating? Did God kind of, in a way, start existing when he created? I know Christians are going to say, oh, no, of course not. He's always existed. But how could he get to that personalness of hearing our prayers today if he's always existed from eternal past? I've always... when I was a Christian, I asked other Christians, does God ever wonder why he exists?
Ending for this means that there's, you can't appeal to previous natural law, right? Because if it just came about naturally without any personal agency, it would have.
Camille says, how's this for an ad hoc adjustment? Yahweh pulled Leviathan with a hook, tied down his tongue with a rope, crushed his head, and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert.
Come about naturally because there was an infinite amount of time prior to the beginning of the universe for the natural process to work themselves out. The universe would have come into existence necessarily in infinite past.
No, not if there's a quantum fluctuation, Tyler, as William Lane Craig has said.
No, we can do that false immediately just using the examples of particles. We know that particle decay happens on the quantum level. There's an infinite amount of spectrum when it could decay, but it decays at a particular time due to quantum fluctuation. So we know that there are natural properties that allow for an actual infinite, and it can specifically pick a number in that infinite to cause it. So like I can just pick 42. There's infinitely many numbers before 42. Well, quantum physics can do the same thing. So there's no problem with saying the universe was created to exist at a particular time with an infinite past. We already know of natural mechanisms that can do that.
Except you already inserted yourself in a finite timeline. So that's the problem with that example. No. So you already have a finite beginning.
No, the quantum mechanics exists before space and time, independent of space and time. So it's not.
I understand. But what I'm saying is when we're talking about something like particle decay rates, you're already dealing with a finite timeline where if
this is the thing I think most Christians don't get, or I shouldn't blame it on Christians, just most people in general, that there could be a natural reality outside our space, outside our time, outside our matter that is completely natural, unknown to us, that exists. And what Tom is basically saying, this can explain our fundamental reality just as well as a personal Jesus.
If that naturally and necessarily was going to occur, if you have an infinite past, right, that would have already happened. So in saying that, you're either ignoring the finite past of the created universe, or you're begging the question of an eternally necessarily existing universe, which may be a faith-based commitment for you, but you haven't demonstrated it yet.
See, here again, I want to make this very clear. Tyler is saying that there's a difference between faith and demonstrating something. Tyler, you're perpetuating that myth that faith has to do with things other than evidence and demonstration. You got to stop that. You're encouraging atheists to keep using faith in that way. You got to stop doing that. Faith is about thinking. Faith is about reasons and evidence, right?
Well, no. Again, that's in quantum mechanics, time and space are emergent from something else that exists independent of all time and space. So there is the finite time thing is irrelevant to quantum mechanics and the decay of the particle. That happens independently of the timeline. That's why there's an infinite amount of time it could decay, but it decays at a particular time because it's independent of time. So that argument doesn't work.
But you're already. We're going to go down a rabbit trail here because you're already dealing with finite timeline and you're actually dealing with the finite creation.
Apologize. So anytime I say quantum mechanics, the finite timeline is gone. It's out of the window. There is no finite timeline as soon as you go to quantum mechanics. All time is gone.
But you're okay. Okay. We're gonna simply disagree on our understanding of quantum mechanics, and I don't think either of us are specialists. So
I can just quote Nima Arkani Hamad and Sean Carroll, who specifically say time and space and matter are emergent from things that are predate time, space, and matter, or
and I can go home to Broglie and I can show that there's different interpretations. I mean, we could go down all these things.
My physicist can beat up your physicist.
Let's go back to what the actual.
No. This is kind of important. So here is a natural theory given in physics, which exists outside of space-time, that can explain exactly what you just said couldn't be explained. So here's one way where I just did it. I mean, it may not be the only way to explain it, but that's one way that gives a naturalistic explanation to.
Brent Losky, you ask a great question. What would motivate God to create in the first place? So remember, if you're a Christian or if you're Tyler Vela, he believes, I think, that Yahweh has existed in eternal past, and that at some point in his personal before and after timeline, God decided to create. Firstly, I think he created angels, and then he knew that one of them would betray him and cause demons to exist. And then he, somewhere in the timeline, decided after that maybe to create the universe. But was Yahweh free not to? Could he have done otherwise? Did he have to create
a universe with an infinite past?
But you're already appealing to something that's within the universe.
I've already said that's false. So the quantum mechanics is outside.
You can claim it all you want.
Oh, I love that line. You can claim it all you want, but that doesn't make it true, right, Tyler? You can claim it all you want, but that doesn't make it true. You need to demonstrate it, right, Tyler? You're asking Tom to demonstrate these brute facts.
So for example, do you think that quantum mechanics applies to the multiverse?
This is why I think, and why I titled, for the people who came late, why I titled, Are You Sinning, Tyler Vela? And that's a question mark. I'm not accusing him of sinning, because remember, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in the concept of sin. I think a lot of Calvinist, presuppositional, Reformed Christians are listening to Tyler and going, hey, Tyler, come on now. You're even entertaining the idea that Tom's explanations for things like logic, but it's just absurd. You should just say to Tom, Tjump, it's impossible. Your worldview is impossible. It's the impossibility of the contrary. You are repressing the truth. You know that God exists, and you're just suppressing that truth. This is the way you should be conducting yourself with Tom Tjump, right?
Yes.
How do you know that?
It's just assumed based off the math.
So it's just assumed. Well, the mathematics doesn't describe the multiverse. Our mathematics breaks down at the point of inflation, right?
No. I apologize.
Here, Tyler is mixing up our reality with other realities, the cosmos.
The multiverse is specifically a result of two mathematical equations. One is the vacuum state, the vacuum energy, and the early universe inflation. So it is actually described by the math. It comes directly from the math.
Okay. Again,
isn't it the Everett interpretation of quantum mechanics, many worlds and so forth?
We're gonna disagree on your understanding of all of that.
That was just a direct quote from Sean Carroll. I can just give you the quote,
and that's fine. Again, I could give you quotes from other people who are going to disagree with it. So,
but it doesn't matter if people disagree with it. So I have an example that just refutes your claim that this can't be done, and it's supported by
I have an example of people who are going to disagree with that. That's supported by physicists.
Yeah, Camille Gregor, you might have to share hell with Tyler, unless he changes his ways and starts using the presuppositional apologetic the way it's supposed to be, like Greg Bahnsen and Van Til and Seitem Bruggencate use it. Like right now, he's trying to put one foot in the evidential side and one foot in the presuppositional side, but this is all just crazy talk, Tyler, because everything else, every other worldview other than your own is absurd. We all know this.
We're just going to get into a battle of experts,
but we suppress it.
So who have differing opinions on these things.
No, I grant there's different opinions. That's not the point. Here is one possible example that can do what you're saying can't be done. We have an example that can do it. It doesn't need to be the only possible one. It's just
you would have to demonstrate that that's the case in order for that to be the case.
Do you have to demonstrate that God's nature is what it is in order for it to be what it is? Do you have to demonstrate that, Tyler? Yes or no? Or is that just a brute fact?
Well, no.
You don't get to assume the benefits of the conclusion of a questionable finding.
Oh, the irony.
You wouldn't allow me to do that.
Right, I agree.
Right, so why do you allow yourself to do that?
Well, no, that's the point.
Why do you allow yourself to do that, Tyler? That's the bigger question.
Using essentially the same thing you're doing. I'm just asserting here's a possibility that can explain it, just like you're asserting here's a possibility with God that can explain it. So they're equivalent explanations. They can both explain it.
Okay, I'm going to try. I keep trying to get us out of the bog. So let me ask you this then. Do the laws of logic apply to the quantum realm?
The laws of logic describe reality. So yes.
Okay. Do the laws of logic apply to the quantum realm?
Sure.
Okay. Why is that the case?
Why is it the case that the laws of logic are a reflection of God's nature? Why? Is there a reason? Tyler, is there a reason why logic is an outflowing of God's nature? In essence, what I'm asking is there a reason why God's nature is what it is? Is there a reason? In other words, could God's nature be different than what it is? Could it? I think Tyler would say no. It just is what it is. Now shut up, Doug, and accept it. Stop repressing. Stop suppressing.
Because it's a part of reality. Well, laws of logic describe reality.
Because so whether or not you're dealing with multiverse, whether or not you're dealing with the quantum realm, whatever it is, you're backed up to it's brute fact. My worldview doesn't. The worldview doesn't explain it, because the worldview just is. Oh, your position is. My worldview can simply state that this is a fact of reality.
Right.
And how is that different from
that's not an explanation. So
that's not an explanation. Okay. Is God's nature all loving? And Tyler says yes. Why? Because it is. It just, God's nature is what it is. That's not an explanation, Tyler. Why is God the way he is? Because he is. That's just who he is. That's no explanation. You see what you're doing, Tyler? It can be just used right back on you.
Pointing to and saying, well, I can affirm the data of reality. I can just say that that's a data point of the data point of reality. Okay, right, that's not an explanation. That's not.
But and even just asking, that's not an explanation. Just invoking explanation, you're getting off the presuppositional trail, Tyler. And I think you're sinning here, because you're saying that us fallible human beings can look at all these explanations and choose which is the best one. We're putting God on trial. He's on the next to the judge there. Well, actually, we're the judges, and we're judging God as whether he's real or not, or whether he can explain things or not. Do you see what you're doing, Tyler? Either become like Michael Licona or become like Cy Ten Bruggencate, but quit jumping from one to another.
Not a grounding or an explanation. That's not how explanation works. So your worldview doesn't account for and doesn't explain that data point of reality. It just allows it as a brute fact of reality. But that's not an explanation.
How is that different from saying your God?
Okay, I think this is where I think Tyler almost caught himself. Let's see if I'm right here.
This allows it as a brute fact of reality. But that's not an explanation.
How is that different from saying your God has a particular nature? That seems to be no different from a brute fact of claiming nature has a particular nature.
Right, because God can exist as a necessary entity, can actually explain those features of reality.
No, this is not the part where I thought.
Nature can exist as a necessary entity and can
But I think he's admitting that his God is a brute fact.
Actually explain those features of reality equally.
But you haven't. Nature existing as a necessary fact doesn't explain why those brute facts are facts.
God existing as a necessary being doesn't explain how those brute.
By the way, this is where Tjump was at his strongest, right here. Let me rewind it.
Those features of reality equally.
But you haven't. Nature existing as a necessary fact doesn't explain why those brute facts are facts.
God existing as a necessary being doesn't explain how those brute facts are brute facts.
It actually does.
How so?
God existing as a necessary entity, as a personal agent, explains why there are laws of logic, which are principles of true thought. That actually grounds it and explains it.
Well, I think you're confusing the epistemology.
Yeah, and then I think it just goes in circles after this. But I wanted to find that that part where Tyler, in the beginning, he basically didn't want to admit that his God is a brute fact, but then he ends up admitting it. Not sure where that was. But yeah, don't get me wrong here. I'm not knocking presuppositional Calvinistic type reformed apologetics. I'm encouraging it. I would love to see every apologist take on the presuppositional apologetic, because I think it turns off more people to Christianity than helps. Tyler is using this apologetic to help, and this is my opinion, to help him not feel stupid for believing the things he does. I really believe that. Well, that can be said about almost every apologetic, to be honest. But like Tyler said earlier on in this video, that it's easy. Presuppositional apologetics is easy. You don't even have to know a lot of evidence or facts or research. All you have to say is that you need my God to make sense of reality, and that every other worldview is absurd. It's impossible that any other worldview could be correct. And then you just try to shut up the atheist or the Jew or the Muslim or the Mormon and say, look, you're close, but it's absurd. You got to have my God in order to explain these things. You got to start with my brute fact, not your brute fact. See, my theory is you look at all the people on this planet, to borrow from Plantinga, Alvin, we all have this experience of the universe around us, that we see things, we touch things, we hear things. This is a pretty good, properly basic belief that this universe and its constants and its laws of physics is real and there. Sure, we can be in the Matrix, but I think my presuppositions that the universe exists and has the reality it has, the properties it has, and that we can learn things about it, is more properly basic than Tyler's presupposition that God has to be real and everything else doesn't make sense without him. I think that's an add-on. I think actually evolution can explain that add-on. And so just by looking at all the different views of God and the supernatural on this planet and how they contradict each other is pretty strong evidence that Tyler's brute fact is not properly basic. Because they can't all be true, and Tyler would admit that. Plus, let me get to the real crux of it. As said at the very beginning, if you came late, watch the very beginning, I think Tyler basically admitted these are not the reasons he believes. I think there's this personal relationship, this what he feels is the personal testimony that he has in his life of God, the Holy Spirit, convicting him, showing him that he's guilty of sin. Maybe there was a girl involved. I think there was. And yes, his worldview helps him explain things and justify things. But this apologetic is not the reason why he believes or continues to believe. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe he's kind of fooled himself into thinking that, yes, I'm not stupid for believing these things and this has to be true. By the way, I have a video called Presuppositional Apologetics Led Me to God or something like that. And I've actually had a lot of presuppositional Christians watch that and appreciate it. I've gotten some good feedback on it. Not that they agree with it, of course, but that they can see where guys like Tom and I might be coming from. Any thoughts on Tjump versus Ask Yourself? I've only watched like a few minutes of that one. I agree, Raphael. I think the humble thing to say on a lot of these issues is I don't know. Instead of Tyler saying, I know my worldview is correct and everything else is absurd, my worldview is the only worldview that can explain X, maybe be a little humble and say, maybe my worldview explains it, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But that's really tough for a Christian to say. Maybe Jesus rose from the dead. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, I've heard Christians say that, but it doesn't build confidence up pretty high, does it? When they hear apologists talking that way. Because there's a lot at stake. Heaven and hell is at stake here, people. Wake up. Stalemate. No, I have not considered using other music for the intro and outro. This music is perfect because for people who hate it, it shows brand loyalty. They stick through it. And for people who love it, they love it. I guess I might change my music for people who are ambivalent. In the times of Noah, PineCreek would have been drowned. My apologies to Tyler Vela. He was scheduled to come on, but we ran out of time. Have a great day, guys. Take care.